The ash wind howled like a banshee, scouring Silas's exposed skin with grit. He hunched lower, the weight of his scavenged pack a familiar ache on his shoulders. His cybernetic eye, a cloudy blue orb nestled amongst the wrinkles, scanned the desolate landscape. Nothing but twisted metal carcasses of buildings jutted from the red sand, monuments to a bygone era. Silas coughed, a dry rasp that echoed in the emptiness. The damn ash storm had been raging for weeks, sucking the air from his lungs and the color from the sky. It was a constant reminder of the war, the one that supposedly ended decades ago. But its scars, like the cybernetic eye buzzing in his socket, were a permanent reminder. He crested a dune, his boots sinking into the loose sand. A glint of metal caught his eye. Not another rusted-out chassis, he hoped. Curiosity, a rare visitor these days, piqued him. He trudged over, the wind whipping his tattered cloak around him. Half buried in the sand was a weathered skull, bleached white by the relentless sun. But it wasn't the skull itself that gave Silas pause. It was the inscription etched across its forehead, a series of symbols that sent a jolt through him. It was Old Tongue, a language long dead, or so he thought. Silas knelt, his calloused fingers tracing the inscription. A forgotten memory flickered. His grandfather, hunched over a crackling fire, muttering about a time before the bombs fell, about a hidden paradise beyond the storms. Hope, a fragile thing in this wasteland, flickered to life in Silas's chest. Could this be a map? A prophecy? Or just another cruel trick of the ash wind? He pocketed the skull, his mind racing. Baron Volkov's iron fists ruled the land, and hope was a commodity more precious than water. If he could find this oasis, it could mean a new start for the wasteland's wretched inhabitants. But the path wouldn't be easy. Volkov's enforcers, half-machine monsters, patrolled the dunes, seeking any sign of dissent to crush. The storm grew fiercer, a shroud of despair closing in. Silas had to get back to the makeshift camp before the sands swallowed him whole. He squinted into the haze, searching for landmarks. The wind grew colder, carrying whispers of ancient machines, the ghosts of a world lost to greed and power. As he descended the dune, a figure emerged from the gloom. Silas's hand hovered over his blaster, the grip worn smooth from years of use. The figure stumbled closer, ragged and desperate. It was a young girl, no more than 12, with ash-smeared cheeks and wide, terrified eyes. "Please," she croaked. "The Baron's men, they took my family." Silas stared, torn. He had his own burdens to bear. But he knew the girl's fate if he left her. With a heavy sigh, he took her hand. "Come with me, kid. I've got a storm to outrun and a prophecy to follow." The girl clung to him as they sprinted through the ash, the skull's whispers echoing in his mind. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Silas felt something other than despair. The storm raged, but within its embrace, hope grew stronger. Whether it was a mirage or a beacon, he had to find out. The wasteland had taken so much, he wouldn't let it claim the girl's future too. The camp, a cluster of scrap metal hovels, came into view, a stark contrast to the mythic images the skull conjured. He pushed her towards the nearest shelter, his heart pounding. "Stay here," he told her, his voice gruff. "I'll be back." He had to plan, to prepare. The Baron's grip was tight, but Silas had one advantage, the desperation of the dying. And if the oasis was real, he'd fight tooth and nail to reach it. He'd seen too much death, felt too much pain. He owed it to the girl, to himself, to the whispers of a better world his grandfather had left him. With a newfound resolve, Silas set to work. The whispers grew louder, the promise of green and blue skies beckoning from the heart of the storm. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But in the grimdark wasteland, hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. And he was about to aim it straight at Baron Volkov's heart. He gathered supplies, pilfered from the abandoned remains of the world before the fall. Each item was a silent testament to the lives that had once been lived here: a crumpled water bottle, a half-melted toy soldier, a faded photograph of a smiling family. They fueled his determination, reminders of what could be restored if he found the oasis. The camp's whispers grew to murmurs as Silas shared his discovery. Some scoffed, their hope long buried beneath the ash. Others, like the girl, watched him with wide-eyed wonder. They saw in him a spark of defiance, a refusal to succumb to the Wasteland's eternal despair. Silas approached the camp elder, a grizzled man named Krav. His eyes, though weary, burned with a fierce intelligence. "I've seen the old tongue before," Krav said, examining the skull. "But never carved with such purpose. This could be real." Together, they pieced together the skull's riddle, the symbols forming a cryptic map that pointed westward, into the very heart of the ash storm. It spoke of ancient devices, long lost to time, that could be reactivated to part the storm's curtain. It was a quest that seemed tailored for a hero of legend, not a weary scavenger with a cybernetic eye. The girl, whose name was revealed to be Asha, clung to Silas's side. Her wide eyes searched his face, seeking assurance. He offered a small, tight smile, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "We'll find your family," he said. "And the Oasis." The camp buzzed with excitement and fear. A handful of volunteers stepped forward, willing to brave the storm. They were outcasts and survivors, united by desperation and the flicker of hope that Silas had brought. They knew the risks, the treacherous sands, the Baron's patrols, the ever-present threat of the storm itself. But they had nothing left to lose. Silas's heart grew heavy as he looked upon them. They were counting on him, and he was just a man, scarred and broken by the wasteland. Yet, he felt a strange warmth in his chest, something that had been absent for a very long time. It was the weight of responsibility, the burden of hope. As the storm's intensity grew, they set off into the abyss, the skull tucked safely in Silas's pack. The ash churned around them, a relentless fog of despair. Each step was a declaration of rebellion against the tyranny of the desert and the barren. The wind screamed their defiance back at them, but they marched on. The horizon was a wall of black, the storm's maw waiting to devour them. Silas tightened his grip on his blaster, the metal cold and reassuring in his hand. The girl's hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. They had each other, and perhaps that was enough. Their journey had begun, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But in the heart of the wasteland, even a flicker of hope could become a raging fire. And Silas intended to let it burn. The first few days were a blur of endless dunes and biting ash. Silas's cybernetic eye, a relic of a more technologically advanced age, helped navigate the treacherous terrain. It pierced through the gloom, scanning for any signs of life, any hint of the mythical oasis. The device's hum was a comforting white noise amidst the relentless wind. Asha's spirits never wavered, not even when the storm threw its worst at them. Her resilience was a balm to Silas's weary soul. She spoke of her family, her voice a gentle melody in the cacophony of the wasteland. Her words painted a picture of a world Silas hadn't seen in decades, a world of laughter, of greenery, of water that wasn't a scarce and precious resource. Their small band grew closer as they faced each challenge, their shared hope forging bonds stronger than the iron that made up their weapons. They took turns carrying Asha when her legs grew too weak, her faith in them unshaken. Silas watched her, wondering if he'd ever had that kind of belief in anything, especially himself. But the wasteland had its own cruel sense of humor. On the fifth day, the storm grew quiet. Too quiet. The ash thinned, revealing a horizon that was anything but welcoming. Before them lay the ruins of a city, its skeletal structures reaching skyward like the fingers of a drowning giant. Silas felt a knot in his stomach, a premonition of trouble. This was the land of the Baron's enforcers, the place where hope went to die. He called a halt, his eyes scanning the eerie silence for any sign of danger. The others huddled around, fear etched on their faces. "This is where we'll find the devices we need to continue," he said, his voice low and firm. "We need to move fast and stay low." They ventured into the dead city, their footsteps echoing through the ash-covered streets. The buildings were like tombstones, each one a monument to the folly of the ancients. The air was thick with the stench of decay and rust. As they approached the city's heart, where the skull's map indicated the devices were hidden, they heard the distant rumble of engines. The Baron's patrols. Silas's hand tightened on his blaster. Split up, he ordered, his voice a harsh whisper. Find cover. We'll regroup at the center. The group scattered, the tension palpable. Silas and Asha found refuge in the hollowed-out shell of an old vehicle. From their vantage point, they watched the enforcers roll by, metal giants with glowing eyes that pierced the gloom. Silas, Asha whispered, her voice trembling. What if they find us? He squeezed her hand. They won't. We're too smart for them. And we're not alone. Their eyes met, and in that moment, he realized she had become more than just the girl he'd sworn to protect. She was the embodiment of the hope he'd carried all these years, a hope that had led them here. The patrol passed, the Engine's growl fading into the distance. Silas checked his scavenged map, the symbols from the skull's inscription pulsing with a strange energy. They were close. South close. They emerged from their hiding place and continued their trek. The city was a labyrinth of despair, each turn a potential trap. But the whispers grew louder, guiding them through the decay. Finally, they reached the center, a vast square dominated by a colossal statue of Baron Volkov. Silas felt a twinge of anger, the face of the tyrant leering down at them from his pedestal of power. But there, beneath the statue's outstretched hand, lay the devices. The air crackled with anticipation as they approached. The skull had not led them astray. The devices were ancient, their surfaces pitted and worn, but the glow within promised salvation. With trembling hands, Silas activated the first one. The wind died, the ash fell still. The sky above them began to change, the black clouds parting like a curtain to reveal a hint of deep blue beyond. The wind that had been their constant tormentor for so long died down to a gentle whisper, and the ash fell like a veil of sadness lifting from the world. Silas stared up, the first genuine smile in years tugging at the corners of his mouth. Could it be? Was this the first step towards the Oasis? They worked swiftly, setting the ancient devices in place, each activation sending a pulse of energy through the ground. The air grew warmer, cleaner, and the distant sound of something other than the storm's fury reached their ears. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there the promise of water flowing. The last device clicked into place, and the square was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. The air around them shimmered, and a wall of ash and sand rose, sculpting itself into a barrier that shielded them from the storm's fury. The light grew stronger, a beacon in the heart of the desolate city, and Silas felt his heart swell with hope. But hope was a fickle creature in the grim-dark wasteland. The moment of victory was shattered by the roar of engines growing louder, the clank of metal footsteps closing in. The Baron's enforcers had found them. Silas pushed Asha behind him, his blaster drawn. The others emerged from their hiding places, weapons at the ready. The enforcers burst into the square, a phalanx of steel and malice. Silas's chest tightened. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the devices were not yet fully operational. Yet, in the face of the wasteland's harsh reality, they stood firm, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be broken. The first shot rang out, a fiery streak that painted the ash-filled air. Silas returned fire, his aim true, a silent promise to Asha and the life she represented. The battle was brutal, a dance of death in the shadow of the once mighty statue. The enforcers fell, one by one, their mechanical limbs twitching in the dust, but so too did their companions. Asha clung to his leg, her eyes wide with fear, but in them, Silas saw the spark of defiance. He picked her up, the weight of the world and her future in his arms, and sprinted for the devices. If they could just activate the final one, the Oasis would be within reach. The remaining enforcers closed in, their mechanical limbs a blur. Silas's heart hammered in his chest, each beat a countdown to oblivion. He reached the device, the light pulsing in time with his heart. With a final push, he slammed it into place, and the world around them trembled. The ash storm's wall shuddered, the light growing blinding. The enforcers faltered, their circuits overloading. The air grew still, the ash falling like a gentle rain. And through the fading light, Silas saw the first hint of green, a sliver of possibility in the endless sea of despair. The Oasis. It was real. Silas took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sweet fragrance. It was a taste of freedom, a promise of a future that wouldn't be defined by the wasteland's grip. He looked at Asha, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "Come on," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with a newfound resolve. "Let's see what this place has to offer." They stepped out of the shadows, the harsh sunlight momentarily blinding them. But as their eyes adjusted, they saw others emerging from the rubble, figures hesitant but hopeful. Krav, the grizzled elder, was among them, a weary smile etched on his weathered face. Silas met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. This wasn't just an oasis. It was a chance at redemption, a chance to build something new from the ashes of the old. There would be challenges, of course. The technology within the tower was complex, the land untamed. But they had faced worse. Asha, ever curious, tugged on Silas's sleeve. "What about the others?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The ones left in the wasteland?" Silas's heart ached. The oasis was a sanctuary, a refuge from the storm's relentless fury. But beyond its lush embrace, the wasteland stretched on, a vast and unforgiving expanse. The survivors they had encountered were just a fraction of those who still clung to life in the ash dunes. Krav stepped forward, his voice gruff but steady. "The tower's power seems to be stabilizing the area," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the green met the red. "Perhaps, with time, we can learn to expand its reach. But for now, we must focus on rebuilding here. We can be a beacon, a symbol of hope for those lost in the storm." Silas nodded, a heavy weight settling in his chest. The oasis was a gift, a second chance. But it also came with a responsibility. They couldn't simply turn their backs on the wasteland's suffering. The knowledge they had gained, the technology they now controlled, held the potential to change their world. A new fire flickered in Silas's eyes, a mix of hope and determination. The journey wasn't over. They had found a haven, but the fight for a better future had just begun. But their victory was short-lived. The ground beneath them split open, the city groaning in protest as the very earth itself seemed to reject the intrusion. The devices overloaded, their ancient power spiraling out of control. The square collapsed, swallowing the statue and the last of the enforcers. Silas and Asha stumbled back, the ground giving way beneath them. He clutched her tightly, their eyes locked in a silent pact. They would not die here. They had come too far. The ash clouds swirled into a vortex, the air around them crackling with energy. Silas whispered into Asha's ear, "Hold on," as the world around them was torn apart. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the chaos ceased. They were thrown into darkness, the light extinguished like a candle in a vacuum. Silas's cybernetic eye flickered, trying to adjust to the sudden change. He felt Asha's breathing, ragged and fast, against his neck. When his vision cleared, they found themselves standing on the edge of a vast, lush landscape. The air was thick with the scent of life, the cries of birds piercing the silence. The ash storm had vanished, replaced by a horizon that stretched on forever, a canvas of emerald and azure hues. Silas's breath caught in his throat as he took in the oasis. It was more than he could have ever imagined, a stark contrast to the desolate wasteland they had just left behind. The sight of green was almost alien to his eyes, a color long forgotten in the monochrome world he had called home. Asha's eyes grew wide with wonder, her grip on Silas's hand tightening. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. Silas nodded, his heart swelling with an emotion he hadn't felt in a lifetime. "We did it," he said, his voice choked with hope. "We found it." The group emerged from the ash cloud, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. They had survived the Baron's enforcers, the treacherous journey, and the storm itself. The oasis lay before them, a beacon of life in the desert of despair. But the wasteland had one last cruel trick to play. The ground beneath their feet trembled once again, the once dormant machinery of the city coming back to life. The oasis was a trap, a lure for the desperate and the hopeful. The very earth around them began to shake, the air filling with the screams of ancient engines. The group scattered, searching for a way out of the collapsing city. Silas clutched Asha to him, his mind racing. They couldn't have come this far only to be crushed by the Wasteland's anger. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of warnings and despair. He spotted a structure, a tower of gleaming metal that stood tall amidst the ruins. The whispers grew frantic, the skull's inscription flashing in his mind's eye. The devices weren't just for creating the Oasis, they were for controlling it. And now, it seemed, they had unleashed something they couldn't contain. Silas sprinted towards the tower, Asha in tow. The others followed, their footsteps pounding the unsteady earth. The tower's door slammed shut just as they reached it, the metal sealing them in. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the hum of power. The walls were lined with screens, displaying the chaos outside. Silas set Asha down, his hands flying over the controls. The whispers grew fainter as he worked, the tower's technology a puzzle he hadn't encountered in decades. Asha watched him, her eyes wide and trusting. "Silas," she whispered, "what do we do?" He didn't have an answer. The tower was a tomb, a monument to the folly that had created the Wasteland. The machinery was too complex, too ancient. The whispers grew louder, the screens flickering with images of the Oasis being swallowed by the desert once more. But amidst the chaos, Silas found a glimmer of hope. A single button, untouched by time, pulsed with a steady rhythm. It was a gamble, a desperate play against the Wasteland's twisted game. With a deep breath, he pressed it. The world outside the tower went silent, the screens fading to black. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of their own breathing, the weight of their fate hanging in the balance. Then, a soft hum filled the air, emanating from a previously unnoticed console in the corner. Curiosity gnawed at Silas, a flicker of hope battling the exhaustion that threatened to consume him. He limped towards the console, its surface glowing with an ethereal light. Etched on the metal were symbols that mirrored those on the skull. As he placed his hand on the surface, a holographic image flickered to life, depicting a sprawling cityscape unlike anything he'd ever seen. Towering structures pierced the sky, gleaming with an otherworldly luminescence. Vehicles glided through the air, casting long shadows on the bustling streets below. Asha gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is it?" she whispered. Silas shook his head, a lump forming in his throat. This was a glimpse into a lost world, a civilization that had mastered technology far beyond their wildest dreams. The image shimmered, and another scene materialized: lush gardens teeming with vibrant flora, unlike anything found in the Wasteland. People, clad in flowing garments, walked amongst the greenery, their faces etched with peace and prosperity. A wave of despair washed over Silas. This was what they had lost, a paradise turned to ash by their ancestors' greed and folly. But amidst the sorrow, a spark of determination ignited. Perhaps, the knowledge of this bygone era wasn't entirely lost. The inscription on the skull, the devices that controlled the Oasis, they were all testaments to a forgotten brilliance. He delved deeper into the console, his fingers tracing the glowing symbols. The holographic image flickered once more, revealing a vast network of tunnels beneath the city, pulsating with an unseen energy. In the center, a structure unlike any other stood tall, its form both intricate and imposing. Text scrolled across the bottom of the image, in a language that seemed vaguely familiar to Silas, the old tongue. With a jolt, he recognized a few words. "Eden Prime, Core, Guardian." The inscription on the skull flickered in his mind's eye. It spoke of a guardian, a fail-safe mechanism to protect the Oasis in case of malfunction. Could this central structure be the Guardian, and Eden Prime the name of this lost civilization? The weight of this revelation settled on him. They weren't just survivors in a wasteland, they were the inheritors of a legacy, a responsibility. The knowledge of the old world was within their grasp, waiting to be rediscovered. But with this knowledge came a choice. The technology that created the Oasis could also be used for destruction. Would they use it to rebuild or repeat the mistakes of the past? The answer, Silas knew, lay not just in the secrets of the tower, but also in the hearts of the survivors they had led to the Oasis. As the tremors subsided and the world outside stabilized, he looked at Asha, a newfound determination burning in his eyes. This was just the beginning. They had found a sanctuary, but the true challenge, rebuilding a world worthy of the legacy they had inherited, had only just begun. And then, the whispers grew stronger, clearer. The oasis didn't vanish. It grew, the green spreading like a stain through the ash. The tower's walls shuddered, the screens flickering back to life. The wasteland was retreating, the oasis expanding. The survivors watched in amazement as the desert transformed, the tower's power stabilizing the once mythical land. Silas looked at Asha, her eyes shining with tears. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. He nodded, a tired smile playing on his lips. They had found the oasis, and it had been worth every scar, every drop of sweat and blood. The grimdark wasteland had thrown its worst at them, but they had persevered. The tremors subsided, the tower settling into a tense silence. Relief washed over Silas, a wave that threatened to drown him. He slumped against the control panel, exhaustion claiming him. Asha stood beside him, her small hand clutching his. Outside, a sliver of sunlight peeked through a gap in the metal hatch. It was a weak light, tentative and unsure, but it was enough. Silas reached out and grasped the handle. With a heavy groan, the hatch swung open, revealing a world reborn. The oasis stretched before them, a lush tapestry woven from emerald meadows, sapphire pools, and swaying palm trees. Birdsong filled the air, a melody as foreign to their ears as it was beautiful. The air itself felt different, clean and alive with the scent of life. Silas took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sweet fragrance. It was a taste of freedom, a promise of a future that wouldn't be defined by the wasteland's grip. He looked at Asha, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "Come on," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with a newfound resolve. Together, they walked towards the oasis, with the ragtag group of survivors united by a shared purpose. As they ventured deeper, the whispers of the skull faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The wasteland would still be there, a harsh reminder of what they'd left behind. But here, in this verdant haven, they would plant the seeds of a new beginning. Silas took a deep breath, the future a mystery waiting to be unraveled, and the story of the oasis, and the hope it represented, was just beginning. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories, give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.